Martin Wolf, welcome to Buitenhof today. Let's start with the situation in your country, in the UK. I understood that the average costs for energy in the UK will be €5,000 per year. And people are now faced with the choice, some of them, between heat or eat. How desperate is the situation?
I think it is going to be pretty desperate. This is an enormous increase in costs. Almost more than 3 to 4 times, and lots of people already on the margin. I mean, we have lots of poor people. Our welfare system is not very generous, and we have a lot of houses, very large number of houses that aren't properly insulated. So people are going to have struggled desperately. The government is going to have to produce a very big package and a very expensive package of support.
There is even an organization in the UK, a grassroots organization that is called Don't Pay UK, and it's calling people for not to pay and boycott their energy bills. Will that be a problem for energy companies in the UK?
Well, I think it may not be the decisive problem, because I think a lot of people just won't be able to pay. It's not going to be a matter of choice. The bills are going to be such an enormous part of their budget that they simply won't have the money. Now, this may make a bit of a difference, but I suspect people who can pay mostly will try. But I think the problem of non-payment for energy companies is going to be huge either way.
Yes. Now, this is not only happening in your country. It's happening in Spain, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, everywhere in Europe. And what we see now is strikes coming up in transport. You have strikes with trains, in hospitals, NHS. Suddenly, the unions seem to get very strong and people are fed up with it. What do you predict there?
Well, I think, and I've made this point before, we are in a situation in this respect very close to the 70s. We have an enormous terms of trade shock, negative terms of trade shock, i.e. we're much worse off because of as a result of the Ukraine war and other forces driving up energy prices. Once they explode like this, people for the first time for 40 years suddenly say, my real income is collapsing. And that always creates militancy. And when inflation is this high, people say, well, if I don't get my big increase now, my real pay is going to decline maybe 10% in the next year. That's unaffordable. So militancy grows and people start competing with one another to be ahead of it. Unfortunately, the money isn't there because we are objectively, as a society, poorer. Somebody is going to have to be worse off. It's a question of how we reshuffle the losses.
Yes. Central bankers who gathered in Jackson Hole in the US this week, they are very clear about what should happen. The Dutch central banker Klaas Knot said interest rates have to go up more, which makes life even more expensive for the average Joe.
Yes, there's no doubt that will be true. Depends on obviously on how much debt they have and how it's structured. But yes, the central banks have a job to do, in my view, which is to prevent this inflation becoming an inflation spiral of the type we had in the 70s, which was 10 years almost of chaos, ending up with this huge recession in the early 80s. They have to prevent that. That is their job. The job of helping people in a situation like this with specific costs, huge increases in specific costs, which fall more heavily on poorer people, that responsibility falls on governments. They can't shun this responsibility. It's a matter of social solidarity. The better off people who can afford it will have to pay more taxes. There's no way out of it, in my view, and they will have to be used to support people in desperate strait. That's something central banks can't do. Central banks can only manage the overall economy to keep it reasonably stable, not over-contract. But they cannot allow this inflation to turn into a wage price spiral. If wages go up 10%, then inflation will go up to remain at 10%, and we will have probably rising. We can't live with an inflation running at that sort of level.
Right. So you have been writing about this in the Financial Times. You have said tax the rich. We should do it now. People who are rich, they have to pay for people who are in not such a good circumstance.
Well, I proposed windfall taxes on energy companies. I mean, they are earning enormous windfall taxes, and it is fair that some of this, which is excess profits, should go. So I would leave the incentives for invest, but profits over and above what they invest should be taxed. But I also think there is a case for a one-off wealth tax, but how you do it, it can be done in many different ways, but this is a situation. We are in a war, as it were. This is a war situation. It's a result of a war. We have decided rightly to join. In this situation, social solidarity is always the uppermost. The same was true in this country during World War II.
Yeah. Where do you see, by the way, interest rate go set by central bankers like Lagarde here in Europe and in the United States? Could it go to 3, to 5, or even to 10%?
Well, the first and most obvious point is we really don't know. This is an extraordinary situation. In the normal context, we would say that the rates of interest where they are now, with inflation running where it is, are far too low. Normally, we would say it's far too low because these are massively negative real interest rates. And when in real terms, the interest rate, as it were, is so much below the inflation rate, there's a great incentive to continue to borrow and spend for those who can. And that's not what central banks want. They think their economies are overheating. So that would suggest they should raise rates quite a bit more, fairly 5%, possibly more. Against that, however, there's a very powerful contractionary forces already in the economy. The huge loss of real income from the rise in energy prices, particularly in Europe, and of course from the stock market turbulence. So it is possible they won't need to tighten as we would normally expect in an inflation situation like this. But I would certainly not be surprised if interest rates ended up at 5% or higher. That would be quite normal in a situation like this. If inflation continues, they could be quite a bit higher.
With all this turbulence in Europe, what do you see happening on the political side of the realm? I mean, we have elections coming up in Italy, for example, and the right-wing fascist party, Fratelli d'Italia, is looking now at 25% of the electorate that is going to vote for them. What does that tell you about what is going to happen in Europe?
I think it would be very surprising if populist forces did not do very well in this situation. They're not responsible. They haven't been in power, so they can always blame the incumbents. They can blame the elites, the establishment. They can say everybody's incompetent without saying what they would have done. So they've got a perfect target, and confidence in the elites has certainly been damaged by a wave of crises: the global financial crisis, the Eurozone crisis, then the COVID, which was not very well handled, and now this. So that confidence has gone. And it does look very much that in today's circumstances of fear and anger, it's the right that is benefiting, not the left. The left has lost its way politically almost everywhere, as far as one can see. And therefore, perhaps least so in Germany, but even there, you can see it with the SPD. So I think right-wing populists are likely to do very well. It would be very interesting to see what would happen in the French presidential election if it were run again a few months from now. Yes. But it isn't. But yes, I think the right-wing populists will do well, and it could be very destabilizing for Europe.
Last question then about the political situation in this country. Prime Minister Rutte, in power now for 12 years, is handling many crises at the same time, and he's not doing a very good job at it because nothing has been solved till now. You know him. How do you see his situation in the Netherlands?
Well, I've always found him a very likable and pleasant and intelligent person, very civilized. Now, and the situation is, well, first, you have to recognize he's the prime minister of a small, open economy, and he can't solve all these problems. I mean, they're coming at him from outside. He isn't. So he's going to be blamed for a lot of things that are beyond his control. But it is also true, he has been prime minister for a very, very long time. Maybe he's not as politically deft and agile as he used to be. Maybe he's a bit tired. Maybe he's being trapped a bit by his own past. This is what normally happens to leaders after a very long time. It's an amazing achievement that he's still there. But I would stress that the challenges he's now facing on so many fronts are going to be just immensely difficult to solve for anyone. And that's true of every European leader.
Very clear. Martin Wolf, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks again.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bedankt voor het kijken. Vond je dit een goed gesprek? Vergeet dan niet te abonneren. Een like of een reactie achterlaten kan natuurlijk ook. Of bekijk een van de andere interviews op dit kanaal.